In the summer of 1402, a city burned. The capital of China, Nanjing, was on fire. And in that fire, the legitimate emperor of the Ming dynasty vanished. Burned. Gone. His name erased. The man who started that fire rode into the city 3 days later. He was the emperor's uncle, and he had just stolen the throne. 600 years later, that same man is remembered as one of the greatest rulers in human history. He built the Forbidden City. He sent Zheng He's treasure fleet across the Indian Ocean. He commissioned the Yongle Encyclopedia, the most comprehensive book ever assembled in the history of the world. And he did all of it by betraying his nephew, burning his capital, and seizing power through war. So here is the question that has no clean answer. When a man steals a throne, and then builds a civilization, what do we call him? He was born in 1360, the fourth son of a peasant who had become the first emperor of the Ming dynasty. His father was Zhu Yuanzhang, the Yongle Emperor, one of the most extraordinary self-made men in history. Born a beggar, orphaned by famine, a monk at 12, a rebel at 20, an emperor by 40, the Yongle Emperor built the Ming dynasty from nothing. And he was obsessed with one thing above all: legitimacy. In his mind, the mandate of heaven was not given to the strong. It was given to the righteous. And he had earned it through suffering and virtue. So when he chose his heir, he followed the rules. The first son was dead. The second son was dead. The third son the third son had died too, but that was getting suspicious. The fourth son, Zhu, was passed over. Skipped. He became the Prince of Yan, stationed in the north, guarding the frontier. And for the rest of his life, Zhu understood something that his father could not accept: that the rules were written for men who had the power to enforce them, and for everyone else they were just words. In 1398, the Yongle Emperor died, and his grandson took the throne. His name was Zhu Yunwen, the Yongle Emperor. He was 21 years old, educated in Confucian classics, believed in the rule of law, thought the empire needed reform. He also was, by Zhu's lights, a complete fool, because the Yongle Emperor looked at the empire his grandfather had built and saw a problem. The princes, his uncles, men like Zhu, the Prince of Yan, who commanded vast armies, controlled entire provinces, and were, in every way that mattered, more powerful than the emperor himself. So the young emperor began to act. He stripped the princes of their titles, removed them from their commands. Some were arrested, some were exiled. Zhu watched and waited. In 1399, he made his move. Zhu declared that the emperor had been corrupted by bad ministers. He raised an army, rode south, and announced he was going to cleanse the court, a phrase that sounds noble and means, "I am coming for the throne." What followed was one of the strangest wars in Chinese history. The Yongle Emperor had the mandate of heaven, the official army, the treasury, the legal right to rule. Zhu had himself. And somehow, against every odd, against years of starvation and desperation and battles that nearly killed him, Zhu won. In the summer of 1402, his army reached the walls of Nanjing. The capital was taken. The city burned. And in that fire, the Yongle Emperor vanished. He was never seen again. Some say he died in the flames. Some say he escaped, that he dressed as a monk and walked out of the city and lived out his days in hiding somewhere in China. The official Ming history says he died in the fire. The other histories say something different. We don't know. And that uncertainty is itself the story. When Zhu entered Nanjing, he needed one thing above all: legitimacy. He needed the scholars, the Confucian literati who wrote the history books and shaped how future generations would remember him, to accept his rule. He got the worst possible response from the most important man he asked. The scholar was Feng Xiaoru, one of the most respected Confucian scholars in China, a man who had taught the Yongle Emperor, who had written for him, who believed in him. Zhu ordered Feng Xiaoru to write the proclamation announcing the new emperor's succession. A formality, a piece of paper that would make everything legal. Feng Xiaoru refused. More than refused. He drew his brush and wrote 4 characters on the paper. Jianwen Dsi. The Yongle Emperor is dead. He would not write the succession. He would not acknowledge the legitimacy of this new emperor. Not with a single stroke. Zhu threatened to kill him. And Feng Xiaoru, A man who had spent his whole life studying the Confucian virtue of loyalty, said, "Kill me. You can kill me. But I will not write those words." So Zhu Di killed him. And not just him. He killed the students who had studied under Feng Xiaoru, the colleagues who had worked beside him, the scholars who had ever agreed with him. And in the months that followed, the execution spread, hundreds of people, connected by the simple fact of having once known a man who said no. The official count is disputed. The phrase 10 families appears in sources, meaning he killed not just the immediate family but extended connections, the students of the students, the friends of the friends. Zhu Di had made his point, and the scholars got the message. From that day forward, no one said no. Not publicly, not loudly, not ever again. The Confucian tradition of moral criticism of rulers, the one institution that might have kept emperors accountable, went silent in Zhu Di's presence. Not because he convinced them, but because he had shown them exactly what defiance cost. And then he built. 3 years after Nanjing burned, Zhu Di broke ground on a new capital in the north, Beijing, the northern capital. He had spent years as the Prince of Yan guarding the frontier. He knew that the real threat to China came from the north, from the Mongols who had conquered half the world and wanted the rest. He needed a capital that could command the armies of the north. He needed a capital that could survive the next Mongol invasion. So he built it. The Forbidden City took 14 years to build. Between 1406 and 1420, more than 1 million workers constructed the largest wooden complex in the world, 9,000 rooms, more than 100 buildings, covering 180 acres in the heart of Beijing. The scale is almost impossible to believe. The main gates are wide enough for armies to march through. The main hall, the Hall of Supreme Harmony, stands on a triple-tiered marble platform, the largest structure of its kind in the world. Today, it is the most visited palace complex on Earth. 60 million people walk through its gates every year. And they are walking through the monument of a usurper. While Beijing rose, he extended the Grand Canal, the ancient waterway that connected the rice fields of the south to the capital of the north. Before him, it was a patchwork of disconnected waterways. He linked them all, creating a continuous water route more than 1,000 miles long, carrying grain and silk and people from one end of China to the other. And he started building the Great Wall, not the crumbling wall of today that tourists climb. The real Great Wall. The one that actually worked. The one with garrison stations every mile, watchtowers every few hundred yards, a military communication system that could send a signal from the frontier to the capital in a single day. He built a system to protect China from the north. And he built a city to house the people who ran it. That city still stands. That system still shapes how China thinks about its borders. 600 years later, we are still living inside the architecture of a usurper's vision. And then he did something that no Chinese emperor had ever done, and that no Chinese emperor would do again for another 500 years. He went to sea. Between 1405 and 1433, the Yongle Emperor sent Shenghe, a Muslim eunuch, his most trusted admiral, on a series of voyages that no one in the world could match. The ships were the largest wooden vessels ever built. The largest estimates say they were over 400 feet long, larger than a football field. Western ships of the same era were a fraction of that size. The fleet, at its height, had more than 300 ships and 28,000 men. It visited Southeast Asia, India, Persia, Arabia, East Africa. It brought back giraffes and diplomats and the acknowledgement of dozens of foreign rulers who submitted to the power of the Ming Emperor. The famous Ming porcelain, the blue and white pottery that still defines Chinese art in the Western imagination, was produced for export in these decades. The Yongle Emperor was selling Chinese civilization to the world. And then, a few decades after Zhu Di died, his successors stopped. They burned the records. They grounded the ships. They forgot about the ocean. China turned inward, and it would not look outward again for 500 years. Historians have argued ever since about why. Some say the Confucian scholars who hated the usurper's legacy also hated the foreign adventures. Some say the cost was too high. Some say it was bureaucracy or politics or fear. What we know is this: Zhu Di reached for the world. His descendants put it down. The treasure voyages ended. And when European ships arrived on Chinese shores 2 centuries later, they found a civilization that had forgotten how to sail. and still he was not finished. In 1403, the Yongle Emperor ordered the creation of something unprecedented, a complete record of everything Chinese civilization knew. Not just philosophy, not just the classics, everything: agriculture, medicine, engineering, astronomy, mathematics, poetry, history, maps, ritual, warfare. Every subject known to Chinese scholars, organized, compiled, and written down in full. The Yongle Encyclopedia took 4 years to complete. It ran to nearly 23,000 chapters, covering every subject in Chinese knowledge. At the time, it was the largest collection of information ever assembled by any civilization in the history of the world. It still exists today mostly. Some volumes were lost to war and fire and time, but most survived. And if you open it, you find something extraordinary. A snapshot of Chinese civilization at the height of its confidence, organized under the orders of a man who knew that the only way to outlast his crimes was to make himself indispensable to the record. He could not erase the burning of Nanjing, so he made himself the man who preserved everything else. Zhu Di died in 1424, on campaign against the Mongols. He was 64 years old. He had ruled for 22 years. In that time he had transformed the face of China. His tomb, the Ming Shaoling Mausoleum, sits outside Nanjing. The approach to the tomb is nearly 2 miles long, lined with stone animals and stone officials who have stood in silence for 6 centuries. The tomb itself is simple, not the elaborate underground palace of the emperors who came after him, just a burial mound guarded by stone figures in a valley outside the city. But the avenue leading to it, the Spirit Way, is one of the most extraordinary walks in the world. Stone elephants, stone camels, stone horses, stone officials in their ceremonial robes, frozen in the act of walking toward eternity. And at the end of the avenue, past the stone archways and the stone pillars, past the weight of 600 years of Chinese history, stands a simple stone tablet. On it are 2 characters, carved by Zhu Di himself in his own hand. Later generations will know. Not, "I was legitimate." Not, "I was righteous." Not even, "I was great." Just later generations will know. He knew what he had done. He knew how it would be remembered. And he made a bet that the city he built, the encyclopedia he commissioned, the fleet he launched, the wall he extended, that all of it would be enough to make the burning of Nanjing forgettable. 600 years later, we remember the Forbidden City. We remember Zhenghe. We remember the Yongle Encyclopedia. We remember the Grand Canal. And we argue still about whether it was worth it. Here is what I want you to take from this. Zhu Di broke the most fundamental rule of his civilization. He was supposed to accept his place. 4th son, Prince of Yan. Guard the frontier. Die quietly. He refused. He went to war against his own family, burned his own capital, erased his own nephew from history, and killed anyone who said he was wrong. And then he built the most magnificent empire of his era. Maybe of any era. The scholars wrote his history. They wrote it under threat. And they wrote, in the end, that he was one of the greatest emperors of China. Was that because he earned it? Or because he made it impossible to say otherwise? Ask yourself, if the Forbidden City had collapsed in his lifetime, if the fleet had sunk, if the encyclopedia had burned, would we still call him great? Or is greatness just what survives? Theseus crossed the sea and killed the Minotaur and became a hero. And no one asks about the cities he burned on the way. Zhu Di burned a city and built one that has stood for 600 years. Maybe that is justice. Maybe it is not. But he built the city, and we still walk through it. If you found this story worth telling, leave a comment and tell me, who should we cover next?